I've started to realize that when you're underestimated, it's actually a strategic advantage, as long as you know how to use it effectively. Because when you are the underdog and you start showing up, people pay attention, but they also give you the respect that you deserve. And that has made a lot of difference in my leadership style, in how I show up, and perhaps also the way in which I deal with my own levels of imposter syndrome.
Hi everyone, welcome to Hakoda Story with Mutarayo. I am your host, Mutarayo. I am the community manager for Artificial Intelligence Accelerator Institute and Product Led Alliance. And this podcast will be centering the real stories of women across tech. We are looking beyond the titles and beyond the highlight reels. So today I'm joined by Swetha. And Swetha has worked at the intersection of data science, product, and AI. And she's the president of data science and products at Loblaw Companies Limited. And I'd love for her to introduce herself in her own words. So, Swetha, tell us, who are you and what should we know about you beyond the LinkedIn headline?
Um, Hi, Mountain Ryo. Thank you so
Hi.
much for this invite. I'm excited to be here. First of all, what a great way to showcase woman in tech, and really code her story beyond titles. I think it's a great show. Thank you for having me on it.
Thank you.
So what should you know about me beyond my LinkedIn profile? First
Oh,
and foremost, I'm a woman of color, a mother, um, and a mature singer,
oh,
and someone who happens to work at the intersection of multiple different domains throughout my
mm,
career. And so it's hard to define my profile under one single category, but you named a couple of those. I've worked in data science. I started my journey as a software engineer, actually. But I
oh,
was
wow.
building data science tools in my first role, and I was super excited to formally learn data science and formally learn marketing. So I moved to the US to pursue my master's, which was a joint degree across my business school and engineering school. And I learned what data science meant, how to wrangle data, how to build machine learning models, deep learning models, and apply that in business context. And that was my roots. And I moved after grad school to work in a couple of different tech organizations. I was a founder of one of my own, an early stage startup, building machine learning recommendations for influencer marketing, actually. And very early, we were way early to market before influencer marketing actually caught on, and so I had to give that up. But I later then moved to a programmatic media startup where I
Oh,
set up um, marketing science, data science capabilities, and then moved to Meta and spent close to 7 years there in leadership positions, where
wow.
my team was building 10 plus different data products supporting Meta's ads business. Um, and that journey then took me to a retailer in Canada called Loblaw, where I was brought in to set up again their data science division, and my team built everything from some of the core machine learning models supporting omni-channel optimizations. We built measurement solutions and data science solutions to help the business make better decisions. And then thought of different ways in which we could monetize the rich first-party data available to drive value for businesses that interacted with Loblaws. Earlier last year, I left them, and since I've been serving as a AI consultant, working with a couple of different organizations like AI native startups and large Fortune 500s, and helping them think about AI strategy and helping them think about how do we bring this beast to life in a very real way in the enterprise to drive value out of it over and above all the hype that surrounds it. So
Yeah.
that's been my journey, and I'm happy to talk and go in more depth if you need any.
Mhm. That's amazing. Your experience is extensive, it's vast, it's impressive. I am so impressed. Wow, it's amazing. What I want you to do, what I want to ask is, when you look back, how did you actually find your way into tech? Was it intentional? Was it exploratory? Because for me, for example, I fell into tech. Like, it wasn't intentional. It was literally me just exploring. and, trying to figure out what's this industry? What's this fancy, you know, interesting looking thing. So tell me, how did it start? Did you fall into it like some of us, or was it intentional?
Um, I come from a middle class Indian background, and I
Mm.
think in my case, it was written on my forehead when I was born. I, my parents gave me two clear choices. It was either a tech and an engineering background or a medicine and a biology background. And in during my 10th grade, I decided that medicine meant way too much working. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to toil that hard, and so I chose what I thought was the easy route, and how mistaken I was to choose the engineering and the technology route. And so I think taking up an engineering career, doing my undergrad in electronics and telecommunication engineering, and then later serving as a software engineer, and making my way into tech seemed very natural in my journey, and
Mhm.
that it seemed like
Mhm.
the right flow. But I must say, working for companies like Meta,
Uh-huh.
certainly a happenstance. I joined them especially as they were building out their teams. I was perhaps like high number 10 within my big division.
That's
So
amazing.
that was happenstance, and certainly I would say I've been blessed with good mentors and sponsors who found the talent in me and gave me opportunities, and I've certainly been mindful of giving back and being that same leader now that I am
Yeah.
in the position and role that I am at.
That's amazing. Um, were there moments earlier on, particularly when you were at Meta, being, the 10th hire for like your team? Were there any moments where you felt like where you questioned whether you belonged in this space?
Uh, I would say not so much in Meta. We were definitely one of those cultures that was very high on allyship.
Oh.
But that said, there have been instances where you're a senior leader, you bring the expertise and the experience, and then you walk into a room and you're trying to present something, but the kind of
Mhm.
questions that come your way seem less like questioning the content and more
Mm.
around trying to place you as an
Yeah.
individual. You can see that based on the questions coming your way. Okay, are you technical enough? And they're trying to like
Yeah.
intentionally poke around to
Yeah.
make you talk about things in a more deeper sense, or perhaps
Mhm.
it's thinking more strategically, saying, "Oh, have you thought about this and that from a P&L
Yeah.
perspective?" And they're trying to stand and gauge you on that front to say, "Okay, can this person actually deliver, or are they
Mm.
just a diversity hire, a show pony sometimes?" And that has happened, quite frankly, less so in Meta, but more so in other environments.
Uh-huh.
And initially, early in my career, I thought it was something to do with me, that I was at fault,
Yeah.
and perhaps I had to make sure that I had to over prepare for every conversation,
Yeah.
um, think about all the different kinds of questions that can come my way, and deliver flawlessly, and maybe those things would go away.
Hello.
But they
No.
never did. um, I did have a very strong mentor, and
Yeah.
they said something that really stuck. They said, "Stop waiting for permission to take up space."
Oh, I love
Every
that.
time you get an invite to a meeting, that
Mhm.
invite means you're here to talk, you're here to deliver,
Yes.
and do not question
Yes.
your worth. And that made
Wow.
all the difference in my head. And I think that has really remained with me ever since.
Wow.
Because when those lines of questions come my way these days, it's no
Mhm.
longer reactionary. I stand my
Yeah.
ground. Um,
Mhm.
and I very strongly believe that when you have clarity of thought, your competence and who you are
Mhm.
naturally comes out. And so you no
Mm.
longer need to project this authority. You just start embodying it in the way you show up.
Mhm.
And that has made a lot of difference in my leadership style, in how I show up, and perhaps also the way in which I deal with my own levels of imposter syndrome.
Mm.
And it's also very funny. I've started to realize that when you're underestimating, it's actually a
Mm.
strategic advantage, as long as you
Mm.
know how to use it effectively. Because when you are the underdog and you start showing up well,
Mhm.
people pay attention, but they also give you the
Mhm.
respect that you deserve.
Mm.
How do you see this coming across in your own journey? I know you've gone through some very interesting experiences
Ooh,
yourself.
that's a very good question. I was not expecting for you to tap a question onto me.
That's okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to put you
Oh,
on spot.
no. No, I love it. You know, someone once said to me, any room you find yourself in, you're meant to be there.
Yes, absolutely.
So, like you said, that's something that also kind of helped me in my journey because I feel like I fell into tech, right? Tech for me was something that I wasn't really actually funny story is I wanted to do fashion. I
Oh,
wanted to
that's
study fashion
amazing.
business. Yeah. I wanted to study fashion business. And then last minute I thought I could just do business, which would give me the foundation of everything. And then, I can do fashion later. And whilst I was deciding what to do in business, I decided to do a program which is business and IT joint honors like degree. So from that, doing that program, I realized, wow, like technology is incredible. There's so much you can do with it. And that's kind of like how I got my entry into it. Now, from that point on, I've only ever worked with startups. Like getting my first job in the industry was just working with startups. And then, from working with startups, I felt like, I think I know one or two things about startups. I think, I think I have a bit of skill. So, I saw a problem which was essentially to do with like wellness with and wellness and women in my community, right? And I thought, let me go for it, let me build this then, let me, try my hands at it. And it was going really well. Got on like a few, accelerator programs. I, had really amazing people come on board to help me who were working for free. At the time, I decided I wanted to pour, everything I had and just pour into it. Now, what I didn't bank on was that as a woman who looked like myself, it's a whole different story when I enter the room and I tell people I'm building this for people who also look like me, give me money. I didn't bank on it being that hard. I think because most of the founders that I've been around, that I've worked with, had found it so easy to, have the support, the money. I thought, yeah, of course, I would get that too, and it would be easy for me too. It wasn't the case.
Yep.
And I think that's when, I mean, it sounds very silly, but I think that's when I realized that, my lived experience and, when I enter a room, like you said, people do size you up, right? They're sizing you up. They're looking at you like, do you know what you're talking about? And when they realize you do, when they realize you've, weighed up a lot of options, you've done your homework, it's a bit of a shock to them. And I kind of like the shock, I like when people are shocked that I'm knowledgeable, or I like when they're shocked that I know things. Um, but yeah, I feel like my lived experience is definitely what's shaped how I show up now. And I wouldn't consider myself a leader per se, but I guess
Oh, you
what
were a
my
leader.
question
Do not doubt it.
that's the imposter syndrome, I guess. That's where the imposter syndrome comes in. I guess what I want to ask you now to throw back at you is how has your identity shaped how you navigate leadership and maybe credibility in your domain?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I want to share a small story. About 10 years or so ago, I was in a role, actually back when I was still working at Meta, and I was in my role, and I remember um a junior member in one of our clients who was then working at a large enterprise. She came up to me one day and she said, Shweta, I've decided to join this other tech company,
Mm.
and I just wanted to come and say thank you to you. So I was kind of surprised, saying, "Oh, I obviously congratulated her," and I said, "Oh, wonderful! That's such amazing news." Um, you know, but I'm surprised. Why? Thank you. So she said, "No, I saw you in your role, and that inspired me to think that I can also do something similar. So I would have never applied for this other role or this other job at this tech company because I thought, hey, big tech company, why would they want to hire someone like me?" Uh,
Wow.
and the fact that you were there and you were doing your work so well the way you did really inspired me, and I wanted to follow, and I wanted to take my chance and see if I can also get a shot. Quite frankly, ever since, nothing I've done has ever come even close to what I heard from her that day. And
Oh,
not that I did
wow.
anything special, but the fact that representation matters really, really hit
Yes.
me hard that day. And that the way I show up and my voice makes a difference. And I've
Yeah.
since then heard a lot of my junior team, people in my own team, women in my team, women of color, walk up to me and tell me, "Thank you for speaking the way you did in that meeting. That gave me a lot
True.
of confidence. I feel inspired to go do the same." And I think that has been very, very intentional in my journey, in that I make it a point to use my voice and use it in the right way, not just to speak for myself, but set an
Mhm.
example for how I think other women of color should show up in these
Mhm.
scenarios. Because we're brilliant, we're meant to be there, but something is holding us back, and I wanted us to break out
Yes.
of that. Um, that certainly is one piece. And the
Oh,
other
wow.
piece for me is about giving people the autonomy to truly
Mm.
own who they are. One
Really?
thing that I often say to my team is to be the CEO of your domain. And I had somebody who, one of my reports, tell me recently, they said, "I've never had anyone make me feel like they trust me with the problem. I've always felt like I'm trusted with the task, but not with the problem."
You.
And I really appreciate that. And I think
Wow.
that is leadership to me. That is what a good leader should be doing. It's
Indeed.
important that we trust people with the entire problem end to end, to help them feel accountable
Mhm.
and to help them feel like they can drive decisions, because that's how you
Yeah.
grow, that's how you learn.
Yeah.
um and earlier in my journey, when I was thinking about my operator days, I perhaps did not get that amount of freedom, because I'd had leaders who'd always set guardrails in how and where you show up.
Mhm.
But I wanted to give that full autonomy so that my teams can fail when required, and pick up the pieces and move on. Obviously, I'm there to support them,
Yeah.
to be that mentor, to be the coach they need, to empower
Mhm.
them. But I strongly believe in setting a set of principles that I'd like the team to show up in terms of. And I set, and I'm known to be a taskmaster who sets uh, really high bar when it comes to operating excellence. But that
Mhm.
said, I do like to give my team the freedom, the autonomy to pick pieces up, to interpret those overarching principles in their own terms and deliver
Mhm.
results.
Mhm.
That tends to be another version of my leadership style.
Yeah. That's incredible. I'm thinking back to like, managers that I've had or like people that have led me. And I was just thinking about their style and what have I enjoyed working with them. And it's been that trust, just allowing you, giving you, like you said, the autonomy of taking up a problem, taking the problem, identifying the problem and trusting you to solve it
Absolutely.
without, breathing down your neck. I think that's what makes you feel like a valued member of the team. That's what builds your confidence as well, I think.
100%.
Yeah.
And frankly, if you think about it, several leaders and several companies, if you look at the way in which they describe, they're looking for people who can operate independently. So that
Hmm.
you will continue to see that as one of the lines in the job description. Because we're
Yeah.
heavily lacking that today. People are waiting
Yeah.
for permission, people are waiting for instructions,
Yeah.
because we're so
Yeah.
used to operating in that fashion. I think it's time, especially given that we live in a world of AI and we are now
Yeah.
expected to be masters of mini managers, each one of us.
Yes.
So in that
Yes.
world, it's important that we know, we create that discernment, we build
Mm.
judgment in how we operate.
Yeah. Hmm. That's, do you know what's interesting? What I find quite interesting is I think as women of color, though, we, I think you touched on it earlier, we sort of like wait for permission to take up space, to, I don't want to say lead, but to, I don't know, I'm thinking from my journey and like talking to my friends. And one thing I realize is sometimes we're a bit scared to just take up that space and to have, full autonomy over our, our careers, right? Because what, like, your junior said, sometimes we feel like, can I do this? Am I allowed to do this? Would they want me to do this? And we kind of second guess ourselves a lot. So I think what my question for you is, how did you navigate or how did you transition from being, I don't know, maybe like a individual contributor or, being in a junior level to then making your way up? What helped you reach that point? Well, how did you build yourself up to reach that point?
Great question. And also one that requires me to reflect a little bit. But I would say,
Mm,
just take a minute to reflect back on the origin, the first half of your question. I think there's
mm,
something culturally in the way we're raised,
mm,
specifically, in Asian households where there's an expectation of conformity, where our parents
mm,
raise us to be order takers, to not question and to not, um, you know, I would always hear, things in my own household that, hey, don't question authority, don't question elders, don't
mm,
say no, don't think into. It's really another interpretation of don't think independently and follow
mm.
follow the rules. Um,
Yeah,
and I think that for years that has really been ingrained in us, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why we hold ourselves back. We were expecting a senior leader, somebody of authority, to come and tell us what needs to be done, because we were
mm,
always being taught in the childhood to not think independently, to not act in our own accord, and instead always be obliging to others.
mm,
And I feel like that's really a generational. It's something that's been ingrained in us across so many years,
mm.
and it takes effort to break out of that. And so
Yeah,
I'm certainly cognizant of that, and I don't think it's a I don't think we can just blame people for behaving that way,
of
um,
course. Yeah.
because that is who we are at some level culturally. Um,
Yeah.
so I definitely acknowledge that, and I think personally for me as well, it's a journey in progress. I by no means am a strong, independent woman who can just act on my own accord, even though I'd like to think I am that. Going back to your original question of, how is my transition from an IC
Yeah.
to a leader?
Mm.
Again, it is something that comes very naturally to me. I think even if I were to look back to my own
Hey.
school, my college days, I was leader in some way or the other. I would
Mm,
I would show up as that person who would bring people together to
mm,
to drive towards outcomes, to run competitions, to run
mm,
fests in my school, and so on. So even in my very first job out of undergrad, I had taken managerial roles in like less than 2 years, because I
mm,
show up that way. So I think I do
mm,
I do have some of those traits. Um,
mm.
but that said, at Meta, the concept of a manager is very different than what it is elsewhere. And I think
Oh.
that made a very big difference to my own leadership philosophy, because a manager track is considered someone who's parallel to an IC track. And you can,
Mm,
instead of being seen as someone who works for a manager,
mm,
the manager works for the team instead, right?
ooh,
It's a very interesting interpretation of the servant leadership style, and I think that has heavily influenced my approach as well, as I think about growing into that manager as being someone who empowers your team and not necessarily building a team that just rolls into you and drives outcomes for you. And instead, it's an
yeah.
approach where you're driving outcomes through the team, through influence. It's
Yeah.
almost like influence without authority in some sense, where you're taught how to bring teams together, how to inspire them, and how to serve as somebody who's there to coach and drive outputs for the team, rather than somebody who's very authoritative and who establishes norms and the teams just follow them. So it's a
Yeah.
very democratized style of leadership at Meta, and I think that has again been pretty core and fundamental to my own leadership style these days. I don't know if I touched upon all the elements of the original question.
I think I asked about the transition, how you went from, individual contributor to, being a leader. Were there any steps that you were intentional about? Were there anything you did? Like, for example, you did talk about, it's something that's natural to you. For someone who maybe it isn't natural for them, who wants to lead, who feels like, yeah, maybe I can do it. How would you advise them to approach it? Or what tips would you give them on approaching that? On approaching.
Great question. I think one of the pieces of advice I give generally to people who are early in their career is to think about how they can own that problem, right? A good leader
Mm,
is one who thinks end to end and can
mm,
take ownership of the problem and identify what needs to be done, what decisions need to be made.
mm,
What are we trying to optimize for in a given problem? And what will we not be doing intentionally? And for somebody to think through from that systems level is stage one to think about leadership. And then beyond that, what I recommend is to really show ownership and
Mhm.
think about how you can bring people together to work as a team. Those two pieces, I believe, are very foundational and fundamental to helping develop that leadership spirit and style in people who I generally coach.
I wanted to ask you, what what shifts when, maybe as an individual contributor, you're building models, you're, building, maybe you're contributing towards, a project. But as a leader, you're building systems, or maybe you're even building up the organization. What shifts when you move from building models to designing systems and, and organizations? What shifts then?
Good question. I would say there are two things that come to mind.
Mm.
When you're moving away from tasks to thinking about
Mhm.
outcomes, that I would
Yes.
say is the shift number one, which is you're no
Mm.
longer thinking about the specifics, but instead you're
Mm.
thinking about if this was the outcome that I'm supposed to drive. So let's
Yeah.
say even if I'm just, if I'm a data scientist and my core job is building models and now I become a leader,
Uh-huh.
now my core job is to think about how do those models deliver when thinking about the larger goals of the business.
Right.
What are the outcomes for the business at large? What is the outcome of the company? How does it translate into the outcomes for my division? And then how does
Mm.
that trickle down into the outcomes for my team and the tools and systems and processes that need to be in place to deliver against those outcomes? So you
Mm.
move from task to outcomes. That's the first step. And
Mm.
that naturally then helps you design and think about what's the right team
Mm.
that'll help deliver against those outcomes. What
Mhm.
is the right tools required to help that team? And then what kind of processes do I need to put in place to help create
Mhm.
a sense of excellence? Either in how we show up, what kind of solutions we deliver, how do we do that in a cost effective manner? How do we do that in a way that's aligned to the governance requirements of our companies? And how do we do so in a way that's mitigating the risk involved in delivering against the outcomes that we've promised? So I think those naturally become the levels of transition that you start thinking about. So whatever you would do as an individual, which we always do. So even if we're building a model, let's say building a recommendation model, I am thinking about the
Mm.
quality of data. I'm thinking about the effectiveness of my model. I'm thinking about the error margins of my specific algorithm, and I'm thinking about how
Mm.
I am showing up as an individual, the amount of time I take to do my work, and how I can get better at that more efficiently. Or I'm thinking about what are some of the latest involvement in the industry, or what are the new progress that's happening in specific types of modeling even. And I'm trying to incorporate all of that into my work as an individual. But the way you translate that is now instead of thinking about a task, you start thinking about the outcomes and saying, okay, how do each of those translate, and how do you start building for the overarching system rather than just an individual task? And I think that is the biggest shift when you
Mm.
go from an individual contributor to a leader, because now you're accountable for the outcomes, and you're accountable to think about how do you bring those outcomes to life. And that is how I generally think about that transition. And for me, what helped is two things. One, acknowledging that was no longer the task and it was about
Mm.
bigger outcomes
Mhm.
that I
Yeah.
had to complete. And then
Mm.
two, um, this was again a very intentional taught lesson, which is I had to pull myself um, out of the specifics. And what that means
Mm.
is specific to give you an example, my first manager role was essentially backfilling for my own job as I took on a leadership position. And
Mm.
I knew my job very well because I was obviously doing it for 3 or 4 years. And when I
Yeah.
hired my backfill, the person was absolutely brilliant. But obviously, there was a period where I was trying to give them, knowledge transition, and I was training them
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
onboarding them. But I would still know a lot more about the specifics of the job than the individual on the job. And this was holding them back. And at some point,
Mhm.
they told me, Shweta, maybe you should just stop doing the job and instead let me do it. I understand that you have a lot of knowledge, but you have to move away from being in the weeds in the job,
Mhm.
and instead to be able to think about it from the perspective of the overarching solutions and system. Like, pull yourselves out of the weeds and think about it from an overarching perspective, I think was one of the first few transitions that I learned as a leader. But that said, it's also important to know the specifics as you are a leader.
Yeah.
You're not just, all strategy.
Yeah.
You should also have enough knowledge to be able to go in and write that piece of code if required. And I
Mhm.
think that is really the important dance to know, which is, how do you think systems level, but also not be so high level that you forget the basics, and that
Yeah.
you're not able to coach someone if they come to you with a problem, or you don't even understand the underlying systems and tools and methodologies
Yeah.
supporting the systems you build. So that is always an intentional trade-off to be thinking about.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was the importance of representation, right? And I think what I'm curious to know is when you were moving from, being an individual contributor to senior leadership roles, did you have that representation? How did you navigate moving from, in being an individual contributor to being a senior, leader as a woman of color? How did you navigate that? Did you have the examples? Did you have the inspiration? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think early in my career, thankfully, I did have very strong leaders who saw the
Mhm.
potential in me and who really gave me chance. And even a Meta, I was definitely fortunate to have mentors and sponsors who who didn't look like me, who
Mm.
but who identified the potential and talent in me and gave me, a series
Mm.
of promotions and challenging assignments that allowed me to expand
Mhm.
my own arena and help me grow both
Mhm.
as an individual and as a leader. Um, that said, that I know is not the reality for everybody out there.
Yeah.
And there
Yeah.
have been scenarios where later on in my career, I was perhaps the youngest vice president of this company, and
Wow.
only other person of my color, only other woman leader of my color. And I remember one of the
Um.
senior SVPs, and she's now in the C-suite of the company. She told me, "Oh, I never thought a day would come when I would see a similar woman of color in the leadership
Wow.
position in this company, because I was surrounded by men, and you know, um, the traditional all white male
Yeah.
was the common leader in that company. And in that scenario, it was definitely hard because you do not have anybody else to measure up to and say, okay, I want to
Yeah.
show up as this individual. And that is where
Mm.
it's important to have your own leadership identity and your own leadership
Yes.
style. Um,
Yes.
because I've soon begun to believe that I don't think there's one perfect leader. Earlier
No.
on in our careers, we're all looking up to individuals and we track and say, okay, I'd like to be like that person, or I want to show up as this individual. I think at this point now, um, I have several leaders that I look up to, but I try and
Mhm.
take certain qualities and put together my own ideal leadership style rather than
Mhm.
trying to completely mimic somebody or
Yeah.
look at another leader of color and say, okay, I want to show up exactly like that person.
Yeah.
I try and take the goodness from multiple different leaders, and I try to
Yeah.
almost Frankenstein together what I think would be my ideal, and I work and track towards that.
Yeah.
And in that
Yeah.
process, I've also identified what my own individual leadership style is. And I
Yeah.
highly recommend everyone think about that.
Mm.
Because during your duration, certain qualities come naturally to you, and certain
Yeah.
others you have to strive and work. But
Yes.
taking some time to be intentional about that, journaling,
Mhm.
identifying your own styles, and really taking
Mhm.
moments to reflect, I think is very important. Because it
Yeah.
then gives you a sense of who you are. And
Mhm.
leadership, again, I believe that you need not necessarily have to be born with it. It can be
Yeah.
trained as
Mm.
long as you know what traits to look for and how you can train yourselves to show up well. And
Mhm.
so over a period of time, you would start realizing what your style is. It's very
Mm.
similar to, let's say, um, you want to start writing a lot more on LinkedIn. And you
Mm.
were thinking, okay, what should my style of writing be? How should I show
Yeah.
up? What tone should I
Yeah.
say? Should I be, controversial? Should I be aspirational? Should I be
Mm.
motivational?
Yeah.
And then maybe, over a couple of initial drafts, you're not the best. You put
Yeah.
together something, and God hope you're not just asking ChatGPT to write for you. But you put a couple of pieces out, and you're working through what your style is. But let's say you're
Yeah.
doing that consistently over a couple of months, then naturally
Mhm.
your rhythm, your style shows up.
Yeah. Mhm.
And you decipher who you are and what comes naturally
Yeah.
to you. And there's a lot
Yeah.
of parallels to leadership as well,
Yeah.
which is over a period of time you discern what your style is.
Yeah.
You determine through good feedback, and which is where
Mhm.
that becomes important. Create your own
Mhm.
system of 360 feedback outside of your you know official performance review methodology to say,
Yeah.
who am I? How can I show up
Yeah.
better? What is working well and what is not?
School.
And also
Mhm.
identify the pace and style for your organizations. Not all
Mhm.
leadership styles work well in a given organization. What worked well at Meta would perhaps not be the best at a Loblaw, or what worked well at Loblaw could not work well in an AI startup. So think about what are those values that's pertinent to a given organization. At what pace that does that organization evolve and work, and what's the velocity of decisions that take place in a given organization, and adapt your style to be in line with that. What comes naturally to you, of course,
Mhm.
and optimize towards pieces that are perhaps at odd with what is expected in a given setup. And I think that is one lesson that I have learned over a period of time.
That's amazing advice. I'm literally writing it down. Like I'm thinking about myself and and my journey and how I show up, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I need to think about this and I need to do this. Um I think it's really interesting that you mentioned, like any skill, right? You have to practice. You have to basically exercise that muscle essentially, right? And what I'm curious to know is, was there ever a time where you felt like you had to show up more? Like, because I mean, in your domain, it's more male, centric, and probably more men. Did you ever have a time where you felt like you had to show up more, to be more like them? Did you ever feel like you had to, you know, conform to the way they show up to fit in, or to be taken seriously? Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even in my very first job, I was the only female software engineer in a team of 12 or so other male software engineers.
Wow.
And there was a point where all my work would be doubly checked because I was a woman and there was a lack of trust. Um, but I worked my way through a lot of hard work and competence. And then later on in my career, every time I was in a room, I would find myself in a room full of men.
Mhm.
I would do some very intentional things like, raise my volume and voice up, or show up as someone who's very aggressive just because that seemed to be the general tone of the room.
Mhm.
But at some point, I decided that that is not who I am. My unique individuality, the voices and the thoughts that I bring in, and my style is very unique to me, and I do not have to conform to the kinds of surrounding I am at.
Yeah.
So to give you an example, I remember there was this conversation. There were a bunch of other senior leaders, all men, perhaps 19 or so in a room, and me and another female peer were the only women in that room. And
Wow.
there's a big discussion that's going on a product roadmap, and it's very heated, all different directions. And obviously, you can imagine when you have strong male, they often tend to take the center stage, and a
Mhm.
lot of thoughts go that way. The loudest voice wins in the room. But I realized that we were getting sidetracked, and so I did something that was very intentional. I I slightly raised my voice, but I said, "Hey, this is not how our systems work. Let me explain to you how." And at that point, the room got, you know, it got quiet, and people started
Yeah.
leaning in, and they were listening to what I said. And our conversations went in the direction that seemed like the right one to approach. And after
Mhm.
that meeting got over, the other female peer, she walked up to me and she said, "Hey, I really like that voice you lent in that room. Thank you for doing what you did." And oftentimes
Wow.
it's just that, to
Mm.
know what you know and to say that clearly is the only clarity that you need to bring to a conversation, and to have the
Yeah.
confidence, and to have the integrity to stand your ground and say what you need to say. um
Yeah.
we don't have to often mirror the room that you're in, or, completely change your style to align with what seems important or necessary in a given moment. Say what you have to say and say it with conviction. That often
Yeah.
lands.
Mm. Yeah. I think that's definitely very important. Saying it with conviction, having the confidence to speak up in the first place. I guess my question for you is for a woman who's still trying to find her voice, still trying to find that confidence, how would you advise her to exercise that muscle?
Great question. One of the piece of feedback I was given earlier on was to think about, what do I want to land. So every
Mm,
time I have a conversation, if it's a meeting, um, you know, I try and plan the day to say, okay, what are the different kinds of meetings and conversations I have that day? And what is the
mm,
one theme I want to talk about and land in that meeting? And going
mhm,
in with that conviction to say, this is the one thing I definitely have to land, no matter how the conversation goes, gives
mhm,
me a sense of how to prepare for the conversation and gives me ideas and ways in which I could frame things. So I think definitely preparation and having a very strong sense of, for every conversation that I am having, what is the one headline that I have to land at that conversation? If that's a meeting, if it's a review, if it's a one on one, if it's a presentation I'm giving, what's that one through line for every conversation? Plan
mhm,
that in ahead as you plan a day or as you plan your week. And that gives
mhm,
you a sense of assurance, and it gives you a sense of confidence that you're going to say the things that you're going to say. And beyond that, if you're the kind of person who doesn't have clarity, who tends to ramble a lot, definitely practice, especially
mhm,
for your really important conversation. Take the time to practice what you're trying to say and land it in a
mhm.
way that seems succinct and it lands the
Yep.
point. I
Mhm,
would say those two are certainly skills that I have found useful throughout my career. Practicing
mhm,
and being very intentional about what I want to learn from a messaging
mhm,
perspective.
mm. So yeah, so practicing and thinking about where you want to land. So practice makes perfect, and always remember this is the outcome. This is where I want to land. That's amazing. I'm gonna definitely keep that motto for myself as well. um, you're now in this, I guess on the back of that and the story that you told about, you're in a room full of 19 men and the conversation's going sideways. I'm curious to know, when you look back at your journey and when you look back, you know, since times you've been in these rooms, what what do you perhaps see that your male counterparts are missing? What was missing in that you brought into that room?
I think being a woman, you have a very distinct viewpoint. We tend to be, even though we're labeled as being emotional, we're actually extremely objective.
Mhm.
And we can multitask like very few people do. So we see a lot of
Amen
different
to
pieces
that.
and we overanalyze. And
Yes.
we're also extremely objective and
Yep.
analytical. So
Mm.
that combination gives us a, and oftentimes, especially as you grow older and you're a mother or you have a lot of responsibilities, your intuition and your spidey senses work in ways very few others can. And I would say, again, use these to your advantage and
Yeah.
really construct your thinking on the backs of these
Yeah.
superpowers that you have naturally been
No.
gifted with. And I think
Listen.
that is what helps us identify things that few others can think about, because
Yeah.
we're not just thinking about what we're working on today, but we're thinking about all the risks that could, come in the future. We're thinking about what could go wrong. We're thinking about insights in ways few other people do, or we have a very strong sense of what customers like and are expecting. And I think a
Mhm.
combination of things of that nature, when combined with strong business instincts like understanding of commercial and P&L value,
Yes.
understanding of outcomes, understanding of what drives value for the business, those factors drive towards that difference,
Yeah.
to help you think differently, to give you an instinct that's different from others.
Yeah.
And I would say use that effectively.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is your lived experience is an asset. Use it.
Yes.
Amazing. I love them. So I guess let's move, from lived experiences to systems. So now you advise both AI native startups and, Fortune 500s. What difference have you noticed in their approach to AI responsibility? Let's talk AI. Like, it's the next big thing. Everyone's doing it and, everyone's building with AI. If you're not building with AI, you're obviously missing out. How have you noticed, these very two different, entities approaching AI responsibility?
Before I talk about the difference, I want to talk about something that I have seen common across both, which is specifically when it comes to things like agentic interfaces.
Mhm.
Everybody wants autonomy, but no one's willing to give the trust that's required
Oh.
to put these autonomous systems in place. Um, so a good example of that is many of the startups are looking, especially in the AI native product space, they're looking to build and sell agentic interfaces, autonomous interfaces, in
Yeah.
the hopes that it could automate some of the inefficiencies or bring net new value in the enterprise. But
Mhm.
putting these autonomous systems in place is no easy task,
Mhm.
because that assumes that you have systems in place from a data
Yeah.
perspective that's centralized,
Yeah.
from a semantic perspective that helps add metadata and value and intelligence to this data. And then on top of that, there also needs to be a context layer, what is recently being termed as a context graph that tells you why. It doesn't just tell you what needs to be done, but why and how do you
Yeah.
execute certain tasks. And then once you have all these different layers is when you can add an AI application on top to say, okay,
Mhm.
go automate my customer service and
Yeah.
customer success layer, or help me automate a supply chain management. Uh,
Mhm.
but up until all these different layers are put in place, it's
Mhm.
very hard to truly find value inside an enterprise. And even
Yeah.
when you do have autonomous systems in place and they make one small decision that's different from how an employee would have operated, a lot of fear kicks in and you want to put, brakes on that autonomous agent and you don't want it to operate the way that, you may have previously done. And I think that is really the mismatch. One, these beautiful systems of centralized data with high data quality, with a lot of metadata and context graph do not exist in the enterprise today because that's not how
Mm.
we operate, right? If you
Yeah.
look around, and that is a lot of work in progress to begin with. And then the
Mm.
second piece is we operate with a lot of tribal knowledge, right? In any given
Mhm.
team, why are you running queries the way you are, or why are certain dashboards
Yeah.
more useful than the other, or
Yeah.
why are we running returns in a specific way and not the other way? These are tribal knowledge that sits within domain experts that sit within human
Mhm.
beings, and we don't
Mhm.
codify them. Not everything is neatly documented, and that is what is missing today when you think about finding success in the enterprise or finding success with AI and agentic applications versus just building the tech. And I think when it comes to the enterprise, the fact that we're unwilling to trust the AI system to completely do what we have tasked to do it with, and that
Mm.
questions like what does a good AI application look like? Or
Mm.
who is to take fault when an AI hallucinates or it gives incorrect responses? Um, or, how do we decide that an agency system is not silently degrading? Um, do we have continuous CI/CD like applications in place to continuously monitor outside of generic eval functions that we have in place? These are systems that are yet to be built. And I think on one side, we are unwilling to give it the trust and autonomy that an agentic system requires. But on the other side, neither have we built, enough architecture in place for these
Mhm.
agentic systems to earn our trust. Trust is
Yeah.
being viewed as a very emotional response today. I think we need to get it to a place where it becomes measurable. So we know
Mhm.
how often do agentic and AI systems fail? What needs to be the mitigation route? How do we fix and correct it? So I feel that is the broken layer today, and that is what is required if you think about fixing it. But the
Mm.
good news is I have seen several cases of shadow agents, as an example, where they work alongside humans and humans in the loop to make recommendations, and they start logging their decisions to say, okay, this is why I chose to do certain actions.
Yeah. Mhm.
And then we're able to use methodologies to either create guardrails around it or benchmarks
Mhm.
to say, okay, how can we have the agency system perform better in its next iteration? And
Mhm.
I think that sense of earned confidence and trust is what is required to find true value from an AI and agentic application. The technology part, I think, frankly, the easier conversation. But to create this alignment, to build that trust, is what is missing today, and what is perhaps stalling us from seeing true progress.
Okay, so what excites you or concerns you about AI?
Uh, Two great questions. I think what really excites me about AI is that it's inevitably going to become the next operating system, the next invisible infrastructure layer, and
Mm.
it will help reduce the cognitive load of doing certain workflows, certain tasks,
Mhm.
and make it very easy for us to run about our day to day. And I think that is something that I'm very excited about. Outside of chatbots, outside of interfaces, it would it would become just like your mobile phone, of how you have
Yes.
Android and Apple's operating systems. It will become our next OS, and I'm very excited for that. But the piece that concerns me again is going back to my previous discussion. It's measurement and accountability. Um,
Yes.
are we building these systems in a manner that is safe, that has integrity, and more importantly, who gets to shape these systems? Because diversity is such an important element in that conversation. We are soon begin to raise a generation of children who are going to interact with AI in ways we have interacted with our mobile phones.
Mm-hmm.
How do we determine that these systems continue to remain safe? Um,
Yes.
as an example, now, even when you think about systems like ChatGPT, outside of enterprise use, they are a consumer facing product today.
Oh.
And the way in which these foundational models have been built, they assume that users would use them responsibly.
Yes.
Is
Mm.
that the case though?
Yes.
Who gets to do moral policing on what kind of content is admissible in these solutions? Who gets to do the diversity benchmarking in ensuring that these systems are not biased? They are not
Mm.
um, being built on top of data. And it is unfortunate today because if you think about the vast majority of data feeding into many of our foundational models, it is coming in from the Northern America, the Western world, and is not necessarily representative of the different kind of cultures, the different kinds of thinking that is around. And those are pieces, the piece of discernment that we need, and the kind of biases and benchmark we need to put in place such that these systems are safe and
Mhm.
trustworthy, I think are elements of concern for me, and certainly is something that's still work in progress.
Honestly, I definitely mirror your what you're saying. I think for me as well, um, the biases that naturally are weaved into these systems, it's what's concerning. Who are the people building it, and how do we then get, how do we build systems that are built by the majority, right? Not just the minority, not just a small group of people building it, and then everybody else is using. How can we all contribute to to these systems? I think it's one thing that I ask myself. I don't think it's a question that we'll be able to answer anytime soon. But it's definitely something to think about, I reckon. But yeah,
Absolutely. And it's a big one, and it's a work in progress.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I think another thing that I'm curious about is how do you think about sustainability when it comes to, in a fast moving AI world? Because there's a lot of conversation around, the what AI does to our environment. Is this something you think about? Is this something you've explored?
Absolutely. I think from the carbon footprint that is increased with excessive compute power that's going in, and the way in which there is really a land grab for building data
Oh.
centers, and the amount of energy that goes into building these, I feel are
Mm-hmm.
questions that we are continuing to talk about. Uh, Compute is an element that is of concern, though. Because think
Mm.
about the amount of energy it takes to run a single query on your
Yeah.
ChatGPT interface or on a Cloud interface. That is only going to continuously exponentially increase as these systems
Yeah.
become scaled and are accessibly used elsewhere. But that said, there is a lot of work that is being done from a research perspective to make these solutions compute effective. And I
Mm-hmm.
think equally, we have to responsibly think about the kind of energy generation that goes in. Are we using a renewable form of energy to help power these compute solutions, these massive data centers that are now being built in the space, I hear, to help support um, query generation, and what that looks like in the future is, quite frankly, something beyond comprehension. Um,
Yeah.
I don't think enough thought is being put into the sustainability, quite frankly. And
So,
we're rushing to scale applications without thinking about the
yes.
repercussions here. And it's important that we take time to think through and
Yes.
research on
Yes.
this element as well.
Yes, definitely. I agree with you. I think, we're also occupied with, agentic AI. What can we build with it? Who has the biggest system? Who can do this? We can do that. But we're not thinking about the impact it has on our environment. And we're not thinking about impact it has or the long-term impact on our lives. So, yeah. So definitely something to think about. I think it's an aspect of research that I'm very interested about that and building equity building equitable systems. That's definitely like where my interests lie, and I'm exploring a bit more. So we've talked about your journey, how you found yourself in tech. We've talked about some of the work you've done, your leadership style. We've talked about AI and the next big thing. I think now what I want to know is um you're currently exploring your next chapter. What are you prioritizing right now? What are you prioritizing differently now?
I think what I'm prioritizing right now is three things. One, I want to work on hard problems. I'm a sucker for them. To
Mhm.
certainly work in an environment where the stakes are high and the leadership is willing to sit with discomfort, because that openness is so important. And three, have fun. Not take
Ooh,
ourselves so seriously that we forget why we got into working on this problem set to begin with. And I
yes.
think those are the three kinds of elements that I am prioritizing at the moment. And invariably, they triangulate to working on some element of AI, because agentic development and AI development is certainly the hot space today, where we're still trying to solve several hard problems, and that's very exciting for
Mhm.
me. And I want to
Yeah.
work in an environment that's either building the technology and embedding them into products, or just technology forward and enterprise thinking about doing things in a step change fashion and not succumbing to status quo. Uh,
Mm.
so those are elements that I'm trying to triangulate and work towards.
I love that. I love the hard things and the fun, having fun. That is very important. We
That
have to
is so
remember to have.
important. We often forget that.
We do, we do. I think what I want to do now is, before we wrap up, I want to I'd love to know how you're actually taking care of yourself right now. Because, the industry moves so fast. The space you're in can be very exhausting. And whether it's your physical health or, your mental health, what does wellness look like for you? How do you take care of yourself?
Great question, and I think that's specifically as women and as you grow older, um, you do not find time for yourselves unless you
With
actively carve it out.
when
I heard something recently, and it totally took me by surprise. Especially as you're a mother, you remember the birth dates and the exact ages of everybody in your family, but often you have to think twice to think about how old you are, because it doesn't come naturally to you unless And I thought about it 1 minute, and I was like, that is so true. If you suddenly stop me and ask me how old I am, I have to think twice, and I was like, is that how old I am? But if you ask me how
that's
old
it.
my kids are, I would say that in a second. And
Yeah.
that just happens to be how us as women are wired. So I have told myself that I would actively take time for myself and not feel guilty for giving me that time. Um, and last year, I taught myself a skill that I haven't learned in the 4 decades of being alive, which is swimming. And I actively
Oh, I love
carved
that.
time out and went to swimming classes, and I've cleared a couple of levels, and I'm feeling pretty confident about that. And that is something that I'm doing to maintain my wellness. But in the past, where I felt so guilty for carving out then 1 hour to take classes, especially on a weekday when I'm like, oh no, I wouldn't get time with my family, or what about cooking and cleaning and this and that? And then um I've told myself that I won't feel that guilt and that I will go
Yeah.
out there and take that time. And I'm definitely thankful that I have my partner who's very supportive for things of that nature. But um, I highly recommend all the women listening to this think about, what are you doing for yourselves and
Mm,
how not to feel guilty about taking that time. And that could be anything at all,
mm,
going out for a walk, going to a coffee shop, and taking an hour every Friday just for yourself. Um,
yeah.
I've started doing that for myself these days. Not feeling guilty for giving myself the time, because I'm certainly behind on that.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. And I think that's very important. It's that guilt. I think you're feeling guilty. You're like, oh, I could be doing this, or I could be doing the laundry, or the house might be messy. Why can't I? But again, you're just a girl.
Exactly.
You just a girl. And you deserve good things too, and you deserve rest. I think
One
that's one
hundred
thing I'm learning
percent.
is I don't have to earn rest. Like, rest is not something you earn. Rest is something that's natural, that you deserve, that you need. As humans, full stop, you need rest. And you need to take care of yourself, and you need to do things for yourself. You're always doing things for everybody else. You probably remember everyone's appointments, everyone's, extracurricular activities. You've probably set this. You're probably the one who set it up for them, right? But then what about you? How do you pour into yourself? But I love that. I also want to explore swimming, actually. So I think I'll definitely do it very
Go
soon.
for it.
This year. Definitely. Um okay, so finally we spent, the past hour talking about, what you've learned, how, what you've mastered, how you've grown. And I think what I'm curious about now is, what is one question, and that could be in life or in your career, that you're still trying to find an answer to?
I must say this has been a very reflective conversation. It's very life affirming, and thank you for doing this, and
Thank
kudos
you
to
for
you for
talking
it.
to me.
My question, I have so many of those, but I think for now, my biggest question is, how do I find peace with myself?
Ooh,
For just the way I am, without having to, always. Again, as women, we're always all overanalyzing. We're always questioning ourselves, and one of the things that I am trying to tell myself in the form of a question is to say, how do I come to the agreement that I am enough just the way I am?
hmm, ooh, ooh. Oh my goodness. Wow. No, you are speaking to me right now, because I was talking to a friend of mine, and there's this constant struggle that I have, where in different parts of my life, or in different role that I play, right? Whether it's the daughter or a sister or friend or a wife, I sometimes feel like I'm not doing enough. And I sometimes feel like I'm not enough. But then when do I get to a point where I'm like, yes, I'm enough, as I am. Whew. Okay, I have a lot to think about after this after this record.
And I think the answer to that question is often you are enough just the way you are today, right now. And the minute you realize that is when
Yeah.
you feel at peace with yourself. And it's important that we
Yeah.
constantly remind ourselves that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what it is, right? The constant continuously set your intention, or reset your intention, right? Like renew your intention. Like, you're enough as you are. You don't have to play a big part.
Absolutely.
You don't have to, overextend yourself. You don't have to do so much to be enough. And it's just reminding yourself of that. I love that answer.
Yeah,
Honestly,
we should. We
that's
should end it with that. We should say, to
definitely
all the women and to all the people listening, remind yourselves today, you are enough,
you're
just
enough.
the way you are.
Just the way you are. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me, for trusting me, with your story, with your, your insight. Thank you for, like, taking the time to, to just thank you. It's been such a joy talking to you. I think we need to have this more conversation off camera, like off record. But for now, what's the best place for people to find you or follow you?
Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always open for conversations and to meet new people and to be of help. You can find me on LinkedIn under Swetha Subramanian.
Okay, amazing. I will link all of the information on the show notes. And thank you so much, Rita, for being part of Her Coded Story. This has been an exciting and incredible conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You've been such a lovely host and for all the great questions.